In our previous section, we discussed some of the trends that we see in climate as it relates to the way that biomes are distributed across the world. Now, in this section, we're going to look at the characteristics of the different terrestrial biomes, including their locations, temperature and moisture conditions, biodiversity levels, and more. So let's start by listing the biomes that we're going to be going through. Biomes in the Arctic zone include tundra and boreal forest. Temperate zone biomes include temperate forests, temperate grassland, and chaparral. Tropical biomes include tropical forests and tropical grassland. And then finally, desert is a biome that's sort of off in its own category because deserts can be found in multiple different zones. So let's get started with the top of the list. We're going to talk about tundra first. Tundra is a biome where you'll find the coldest temperatures on Earth outside of the polar ice caps, which are just pure ice. Temperatures there are too cold for trees to grow, and tundra also has low levels of precipitation. At the same time, though, it also exhibits low levels of evaporation because it's so cold, so what rain and snow does fall there tends to stay there and not vaporize. There are two different subtypes of tundra. Arctic tundra is the type that occurs in the polar regions, including much of Alaska, Canada, and Russia. And this photo here you see is of Arctic tundra in the Canadian territory of Nunavut. Alpine tundra occurs on mountains throughout the world as long as they are sufficiently tall and cold. So alpine tundra is what you will find above the tree line. And this image here is of alpine tundra in the Uinta Mountains in northern Utah, which are a subrange of the Rocky Mountains. One characteristic of Arctic tundra, but not alpine tundra typically, is its permafrost. And permafrost is soil that is frozen year-round. You can see here an example of a chunk of permafrost in this photo. Permafrost has the effect of preventing water infiltration that comes from precipitation. Because if the ground is frozen, then water can't permeate it. So you get a lot of overland flow instead, and that leads to accumulation of water in bogs and lakes and streams. Alpine tundra, the type that occurs on mountaintops, only contains permafrost at very high altitudes. So you don't get the same effect where the soil resists water infiltration. And instead, alpine tundra tends to have dry soil. Because trees cannot grow in tundra, common vegetation includes low-growing plants like moss and lichen, and these go dormant during the winter when everything around them is frozen. And some birds and mammals, such as caribou, migrate to the tundra during the summer season, but very few live there year-round because to survive there, you have to have some extreme adaptations to the cold. Polar bears are one example of a mammal that calls the Arctic tundra home. Mountain goats, the ones that you see on the screen, are an example that you might find in alpine tundra. The next biome type we'll look at is boreal forest. One of the hallmarks of boreal forests is the fact that they are covered in conifers. Conifers are cone-bearing trees that have needles for leaves, and they are evergreen, meaning that they stay green year-round and they don't drop their leaves. Boreal forests are only found in the northern hemisphere, just below the Arctic Circle. The Arctic Circle is the latitude line that encircles the globe at 66.33 degrees north. And you can see in this image, which is looking directly down at the North Pole, the Arctic Circle has been labeled, and then the range of boreal forests shown in green. So like tundra, you'll find them in Alaska, Canada, and Russia, and also some parts of Northern Europe. And even in some extreme northern parts of the continental United States, there are boreal forests, like in Minnesota and in Maine. Unsurprisingly, given the very northerly latitude, boreal forests have a harsh climate with very long cold winters and fairly short warm summers. And this makes for a short growing season. And on top of that, these regions have a low average yearly precipitation. However, most of the precipitation does fall and is concentrated during the summer growing season, which means that the plant life can be supported because they're getting both of the main things that they need at the same time. They're getting heat and sunlight and water at the same time. And then during the winter, they enter dormancy. The soil nutrition in boreal forest tends to be poor, and this is in part because the buildup of pine needles in the O horizon, which you may remember from our soils chapter, is the layer of organic material that sits on top of the soil, so O for organic. And this pine needle debris causes the A horizon of the soil, which is the layer just below it, to become quite acidic. And then that acidity of the soil causes minerals and clay to leach out of the A horizon and down into the B horizon, which leaves the upper layer of topsoil low in nutrients. So because of these nutrient-limited conditions, boreal forests are not hospitable to a very diverse range of plants. They're densely vegetated, but with only a few species of trees that are well adapted to the conditions there. Conifers are among these. They're particularly well adapted because they have shallow but widespread root systems, and this allows them to reach into wider areas to get the nutrients that they need. Their needles, instead of having leaves, their needles minimize the amount of water that they lose to evaporation during those long, dry winters. And then their needles are also dark green, which is an artifact of the needles being rich in pigments that are needed to facilitate lots of photosynthesis happening during that short growing season. As far as animal life in boreal forests, it too is limited by the harsh conditions, but it does include insects, birds, rabbits, foxes, brown bears. In the more northerly parts of boreal forest, you get caribou that are migrating in between the boreal forest and the tundra on a seasonal basis. Okay, so that wraps up the two Arctic biomes. Now we'll move on to the temperate biomes. The first one we'll look at is temperate forests. So because they're found in the temperate zone, temperate forests lack extreme temperatures, although they can still get hot and cold depending upon where they're located. Coastal temperate forests have mild winters and cool summers, and also high levels of precipitation due to their location directly adjacent to the ocean. And then continental temperate forests are located inland, and they tend to have cold winters, hot summers, and moderate levels of precipitation. And regardless of location, temperate forests are known for having a rich soil quality because they strike a balance between organic matter decomposing too quickly for organisms to access in the tropical zones versus too slowly, which happens in more polar regions. And that rich soil quality supports a moderately diverse community of plants, which in turn supports a moderately diverse community of animals. Animal life in temperate forests includes insects, amphibians, reptiles, birds, mammals. Amphibians and reptiles were notably absent from the previous two Arctic biomes that we discussed because those regions are just too cold for them to survive. However, they can make it in temperate forests. And there are actually two different types of temperate forests. There's deciduous forests and temperate rainforests. Deciduous forests are found in continental regions. So these are the regions that are more distant from the ocean, and they lack the ocean as a force to moderate their temperature. So they're named for the fact that they're covered in deciduous trees, which are trees that produce flowers and lose their leaves in the fall. So they're the opposite of evergreen trees. Remember, conifers produce cones, not flowers, don't lose their leaves in the fall. Deciduous forests are really common in much of the US and also in Europe. And then temperate rainforests are the other type of temperate forest. Unlike deciduous forests, these ones are found in coastal regions. You can also find them in the US along with deciduous forests. The Pacific Northwest contains large areas of temperate rainforest. And in temperate rainforest, you'll find mostly evergreen trees as opposed to deciduous trees that drop their leaves. And then you'll also find other plants that love moist conditions like mosses and lichens and ferns, and also epiphytes. So epiphytes are plants that grow on other plants for support. They don't parasitize those other plants, but they do use those other plants as a sort of stepping stool to get closer to some available sunlight because these rainforest conditions tend to grow quite densely. The next temperate biome is called temperate grassland. So, true to their name, temperate grasslands are covered in grasses, and they are found in continental regions, so inland rather than coastal regions, which get relatively low levels of precipitation. And when precipitation does fall, it mostly falls during one consolidated growing season. So, this means that there's an off season that is much drier, and grasslands are prone to fires during their dry season. And grasslands occur all over the world, and there are some regional terms that are used to refer to them on different continents and in different countries. So, in North America, one common term for our grassland here is prairie. The upper photo that you see here is of some prairie in Montana. And then in Australia, it's generally called outback. In Central Asia, it's called steppe. And the lower photo is of a steppe landscape in Mongolia. Temperate grassland is well known to contain the richest, deepest topsoil on Earth. The grasses that cover it are dense, and as they decompose, their organic matter gets reincorporated back into that soil. So the soil is jam-packed with nutrients and extremely productive for agriculture. So it's no surprise that the Midwestern region of the US, which is largely, or at least it used to be largely grassland, is well known for its agriculture. And animal life in temperate grasslands features diverse herbivores that feed on the grasses, including insects and rodents, deer, and then also carnivores that feed on those herbivores, like foxes and coyotes. The final temperate biome on our list is called chaparral. Chaparral is technically a forest biome, but it's dominated by dense evergreen shrubs and small trees. We actually have chaparral here in Arizona. If you drive up north a bit, parts of the Tonto National Forest and Prescott National Forest are chaparral. And you can see where some of those regions occur on this map of Arizona. In Arizona, some of the plants that you'll find in those chaparral regions include cedar and juniper trees and manzanita. And chaparral is characterized by mild, wet winters and hot, dry summers. And because of the heat and the dryness that occurs during the summer, as well as the density of the foliage, fires frequently occur in chaparral biomes, which should probably sound familiar to us as residents of Arizona. The soil quality in chaparral biomes is also relatively poor because of the lack of moisture for a significant part of the year. The plants that grow in chaparral regions have adaptations that allow them to survive through the hot, dry summers, and also adaptations to the frequent fires that run through chaparral biomes. Trees have a shorter height, which requires less water to sustain, and they go into dormancy during the dry season, which reduces their need for water. And some plants also have a waxy coating on their leaves that prevents water loss from transpiration, which, remember, transpiration is the evaporation of water out of plant leaves. And then plants that grow in chaparral regions also exhibit quick regrowth after fires. They have thick underground stems that can survive exposure to a fire. And some trees even have seeds that rely on fire to germinate. They actually have to go through a burn in order to be able to sprout. Animals in chaparral biomes include small insects, birds, reptiles, and rodents. Small animals are the most common in chaparral because of the density of the foliage. It's not easily navigated by large animals. Deer are about the largest residents of this particular biome. So this concludes our look at temperate biomes, and now we're going to move on to the tropical biomes, starting with tropical forests. So tropical forests are located near the equator, and they receive more sunlight than any other biome, and consequently, they are subject to high temperatures year-round. And there are two distinct subtypes of tropical forests, the tropical rainforest and the tropical dry forest. Tropical rainforests are extremely wet. They receive more precipitation than any other biome, and they tend to receive precipitation year-round, although it may be heavier in some seasons as compared to others. And they also have the highest biodiversity of any biome, with an extremely rich range of plants and animals. However, tropical rainforests have thin soil that is poor in nutrients because the heat and the moisture here cause organic matter to decompose very quickly and then the constant rain washes away the nutrients. Most plants in the tropical rainforest are tall, broadleaf trees that form a dense canopy, which you may have seen and noticed in the photo that was on the previous slide. And as a result, it's difficult for sunlight to penetrate down to the forest floor. So other non-tree plants have to get creative to get their dose of sunlight. Vines that climb up the rainforest trees are common, epiphytes are common. And then in the realm of animal life, there's a rich diversity of insects, birds, amphibians, reptiles, and mammals. Various types of monkeys, leopards, and sloths are examples of some animals you might find in this biome. And then the tropical dry forest is distinguished from the tropical rainforest by the fact that its precipitation tends to fall mostly during a single wet season, which is then followed by a dry season. So trees and plants can't grow as densely in the tropical dry forest because of this lower level of water availability, and they may also need to go dormant during the dry season as an adaptation to survive. And then animals in the tropical dry forest may be similar to the tropical rainforest, and in fact, because the tropical dry forests tend to be physically adjacent to tropical rainforests, some species migrate back and forth between these biomes with the ebb and flow of the seasons. The last tropical biome is the tropical grassland. Tropical grasslands are located in tropical regions, so they have high temperatures, but relatively low rainfall. And additionally, most rainfall occurs during a single season. So there's a dry season that the plant and animal residents have to make it through. The main producers in this biome are the grasses, but the biome also supports scattered trees that exhibit adaptations to dry climate environments. And like with the temperate grasslands, you'll find a diverse range of herbivores here that feed on the grasses. For example, in this photo, you can see 4 different herbivores all grazing in the same space. We've got zebras, wildebeest, and 2 different types of antelope. And so naturally, you will also find carnivores in tropical grassland who feed on those herbivores. Finally, this brings us to desert. So our last biome of the section will end things close to home. Deserts are defined as a region that receives no more than 25 centimeters of precipitation per year, which is the equivalent of 10 inches. They are found in both temperate and tropical zones, so that's why we haven't classified them underneath any one of the zones. As we talked about in our last section, the largest deserts occur around 30 degrees north or south due to the effect of the Hadley convection cells. The top photo is of the Simpson Desert in Australia, which is an example of this phenomenon in the southern hemisphere. It's right around 30 degrees south. And then the bottom photo is of the Gobi Desert in China, which is an example of a very large desert occurring around 30 degrees in the northern hemisphere. And deserts can also occur in rain shadows of large mountain ranges. And while we typically associate deserts with the heat, the reality is that deserts are both hot and cold. The dryness of the air leads to extreme temperature variations from day to night, meaning that the daytime gets very hot, especially during the summer, and then the nighttime gets very cold, especially during the winter. Soils in deserts are usually sandy or rocky and also poor in nutrients because there's not enough moisture to support robust plant life that would serve as a source for regenerating the organic matter in the soil. And this sparse plant cover also means that the soil is quite exposed, it's vulnerable to wind erosion, and then when it does rain, it tends to rain heavily, as we're probably familiar with here in Arizona, and this can also lead to overland flow of excess water and erosion of the soil. Given these harsh conditions, the residents of the desert need some serious adaptations in order to survive. Plant life in the desert can exhibit a variety of adaptations, including special tissues in their leaves, stems, or roots that take up large amounts of water when it's available and store it for future use. Some tree species like mesquite and palo verde have long tap roots that actually extend down long distances and dip into the water table to support the tree. And other plants have wide spreading root systems that absorb water over a large area to collect as much as possible. And saguaro cacti are an example of this. You can see both of those different types represented in this cartoon here. And then finally, many trees and shrubs have small or spiny leaves that minimize water loss through transpiration. So that's the plants of the desert. When it comes to desert animals, they of course have adaptations too. Many exhibit nocturnal lifestyles where they sleep during the hottest part of the day and then they're only active at night. Of the ones that are active during the day, they tend to keep to the shade that's found under rocks or plants. And some species, like desert hares, the one you see here, and coyotes, have very large ears that facilitate the cooling of their body. And then many also exhibit lighter color fur or scales that reflect sunlight, and this also helps keep them cool. So this brings us to the end of our discussion of deserts and also the end of our discussion of terrestrial biomes in general. In our next section, we're going to be moving from the land to the water as we talk about different aquatic biomes.